So what are your favorite woods to use down there, Mike, for turning?
I don't really have a favorite wood. We have a genus here called Casuarina, which are hard and have big medullary rays. So those are good, but really I don't mind what wood I use.
He overwhelms it with sharp steel and skill.
So we've got eucalypts are the dominant species here, and you've probably got, well, there's certainly a lot of those in California.
Yeah.
But they have very high shrinkage coefficients, so they're not really that good for cabinet making generally, but they turn perfectly well. So, and I'm particularly interested in turning the softer woods because there you've got to use your, have your tools rather sharper and use, well, I use the same approach, but you've got to be that bit more skillful not to get tear out, because certainly in bowl turning, I don't sand there.
I'm a big fan of the less sanding, the better. Sanding is the devil's work.
Yes, well, I use a different approach to that which is generally used. Wherever I can, I use cutting edges which are ground to about 30 degrees. And I turn actually very slowly, and that way I can, I find I can produce bowls without having to sand them, even on softwoods.
What is very slowly?
Sorry?
How slow is very slowly?
Oh, sort of.
No, what I mean in RPMs, is it like 100 RPM or 1,000 RPM?
Oh, no. I use the same revs a minute that you would use, but I just traverse the tool very slowly when I'm doing the finishing cuts.
Well, what you're saying, Mike, is your feed and speed are moderate. Your speed may be normal, but your feed rate is moderate. And in turning that, I think that a lot of people overfeed the tool and they get terrible results as a result.
No pun intended.
Yes, that's true. I was recently had a chap come to me who was having terrible problems turning beads. And if you blinked, you'd miss him turning a bead. So I got him to take 5 seconds to do each cut, and that solved his problem. Now, 5 seconds, if you actually do a single rolling cut in 5 seconds, it takes forever. But that way you've got time for feedback to occur between the cutting edge, and you get a feeling comes through your hands and into your brain, and then you're able to use your brain to make any slight adjustments as you continue the cut. But of course, you need to have that confidence, and what had happened with this chap, because he was going faster and faster, he did that because he lacked confidence. So when you're confident, you can go slower.
Yeah, you can answer the phone while holding the tool in the same place.
Well, maybe you.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a sort of party trick to, roll beads one-handed, but I used to be able to do that, but I'm not quite as much in practice as I used to be.
Are you set up to do live demonstrations there? I doubt that you are.
No, I don't think. No, I'm not.
Are you set up to shoot video of yourself turning?
Well, I made 3 DVDs myself, which two of them were 3 hours each, and one was 7 hours.
Well, those are evidently you need to hire an editor. However, I'm retired, not available.
No, I just put a lot of information in them.
Too much. 7 hours is too much, even for Andy Warhol.
Well, I think I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that if you tell the whole story and explain exactly why you're doing a thing, then people are able to make the choice, whether to try and replicate that. And if they do, they know enough that if they get a catch, they can work out why it happened and make the necessary correction. The problem with most instruction is it's cursory and people have to guess, and they usually guess wrong. So I'm in favor of having as much information as possible, and certain people won't like that, and certain people will choose to ignore a lot of it, and that's fine. But I think if you give people the full information, you give them the control.
Mike, where did you join us from?
Well, I live in a village called Exeter, Exeter, which is halfway between Sydney and Canberra. So we're around about 100 miles south-west of Sydney.
Well, before Mike gets on too far, let me just say that this is Woodturners Coffee Hour number 51. We've been doing this for a year now, every Thursday morning. My name's John Kelsey from Lancaster Area Woodturners, and we are the sponsors of Thursday morning Woodturners Coffee Hour, which is free and open to any woodturner, although I will note that many of you have joined the Lancaster Club, and those of you who are members of the Lancaster Club who may have joined specifically because of Coffee Hour, I would urge you to attend our club meeting next Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time in order to join us in a vote on whether to spend half our treasury on equipment for remote meetings and digital meetings and hybrid meetings. So we'll go into more detail on that on Tuesday night. I also want to say before, by way of introduction or before we get on with the business of the morning, after the talking I got last week about my technique on turning balusters, I was able to rig up a steady rest that went from one end of the piece to the other using a hole that already existed in my tailstock and a 5/8 inch bar and a prop underneath it. And that worked beautifully. I also sharpened up my large spindle turning roughing gouge and sharpened it as Ernie recommends down to about 30 degrees, and that works a whole lot better than the skew for roughing. And I made an adjustment in exactly how the tailstock center and the ring around it relate to one another, and the piece vibrates less when I have that set exactly right. So thanks to putting my ass on the line last week and showing you where I was at with a large spindle turning project, I got straightened out and I'm now better off and cruising toward making the stair balusters and being done. And on that note, I'm going to now turn to, we have our special guest today, Mike Darlow from Australia. Mike is the author of many turning books, a couple of which I'm going to hold up here. Here's one, Methods. Here's another, Fundamentals of Wood Turning. Here's another. Is this also wood turning methods? What have I got here? Wood turning methods, wood turning techniques is this one.
Yeah.
This one is wood turning methods. And then this is wood turning chessmen. And then this is Wood Turning Design, which in my view is an absolutely brilliant book. And then this is an older one, The Practice of Wood Turning, which I think is largely subsumed in the subsequent books. I rely on Mike's books because they're encyclopedic. I don't always agree with him in a lot of different ways, but I find that what the information he has is superb, and there's lots and lots of it, and he's very well known for that. And the reason he's here today, he's written a new book, which is just reviewed here in your current issue of the journal, which Ernie's is holding up over there. I found the review fairly scathing, but I don't care because some of the things that the reviewer didn't like are the very things I want, especially Mike's encyclopedic knowledge and a current take on chess sets and other stuff. So I'm going to put the screen over first of all to Ernie. I think you're going to show pictures from the book and talk about it, and then we'll ask Mike questions and let him talk. How's that sound? Everybody on?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good. Yep.
I have the list, by the way, from last week of people that wanted to show stuff, and if we get to that this week, we will. But between Ernie and Mike and the new book and discussion that we want to start today on which lathe to buy, we might just fill the hour up. So we'll find out. Anyway, here's Ernie.
All right, I'm going to share this screen, which if you actually want to read my review, I have sent a copy to John already with pictures in it, and you could read the book sans pictures when you order it from Amazon, because if you look down lower, my review is on Amazon. But I figured I have the pictures from many of the projects in Mike's book, which he was kind enough to send me. And if you direct me, Mike, maybe you could best explain these objects, such as the chess set that we have up here now. And one further point is Mike and I totally agree on the fact that current amateur wood turning is somewhat fixated on turning vessels, mostly bowls, but also hollow forms, to the detriment of a lot of other useful things that one can turn that are delightful and fun to turn. Spindle turning is great. Mike, the stage is yours.
Right, well, this is a chess set designed based upon, it's called a Mani set because it's designed, I've forgotten who the inspirer was.
It was very much Bauhaus in its antecedent. That's a lovely
yes, it's the American photographer. Anyway, the interesting point here is the knight, which, as you see, is actually turned from a circle, and the cross section looks somewhat like a horse's head. So my interest in turning chess sets is to design sets which are fully turned rather than have to carve the knight, which, unless it's carved really well, I think detracts from the appearance of most sets. So I've designed quite a few sets which have fully turned knights, and this is one of them. Also, I think with chess sets, it's important that a stranger should be able to come in, sit down and play with a set without having what the pieces are explained.
Any questions for Mike on this piece, on this project?
Do you play chess yourself, Mike?
Very poorly. I used to play a reasonable amount, and when my sons got to about 6, they started to beat me, so I sort of don't play very often now. But I think you can still enjoy designing and turning chess sets without actually playing with them.
I think the knight design is brilliant.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the German ring turners.
Yeah, it is from that.
Yeah.
Next piece.
This is a picture frame.
This is a diptych, which means it's 2 identical frames and they usually hinge together. So you could put a man and wife's photograph in there. And what I've tried to do in this book is show a lot of different projects which are a little bit out of the ordinary. So there's no nut bowls, no bottle stoppers, just to show the scope that there is within turning for doing different things. If you look at the project books, are a bit like cookery books. I mean, nobody expects you to do more than 1 or 2 recipes out of a cookery book. And I think out of any wood turning project books, most people probably don't do more than 1. So the fact that a lot of these projects people are never going to do is fine. I'm just trying to show the scope of turning, the potential of turning to produce useful things. And also I've tended to pick topics or items which have some interest. So that's why there's the historical and background information. I mean, the review which you mentioned, which I think is a poor review, not so much a review which is poorly written, but a review which I think shows the reviewer's bias. He makes a quote that I say wood turning isn't fun, and actually he misses out the qualifying sentences for that, so he distorts what I've said. And then he also accuses me, as far as I can tell, he uses a rather weird phrase, of wanting to push everything my way, whatever that is. And I don't. I'm all in favour of art turning and useful turning. It's just that I feel, particularly in America, the balance has gone too far towards fine art turning. And as a result, people who take up turning, I think, are badly influenced. And also, they don't know that you need certain skills to do useful turning, which aren't required in the main for vessel turning.
Now, before we go on here, let's see if anybody would like to discuss that a bit. That's a fairly, I find that a pretty interesting set of comments. Anybody want to respond?
I pretty much totally agree with what Mike says. I've felt this since I was on the founding board of AAW, that we pretty much have been taken over by art turning, and a lot of art turners will get up as a speaker and brag that they've never turned 2 things alike, and I always quip that it's because they can't. And I'm an absolute believer that unless you can control the medium, that is, you understand how wood moves, why you put it in certain orientations, how you cut it, the best angles to cut it, all of that, you really aren't ready to be an art turner.
Well, okay, anybody else?
I'd like to add something, John.
Go, Doug.
For me, I started off as pretty much a bowl turner, and the advantage of the turning bowls is it's a very, very quick project. For spindle turning, which I have not done that much, I've just only done some recently, tends to be pieces that are put together into larger pieces. So it's single spindles, unless you're doing a spurtle or something like that, which is fun. And I've done wands and other things that are single spindles to try and up the ante as far as using a skew, are somewhat, I feel, just a little bit more limited from my perspective as far as the speed with which you can do it. Even a chess set takes a long while to do as far as that's concerned. So I think I'm migrating towards spindle turning as my turning develops and matures, just because it's another area of exploration. Once I've mastered one area, I'm looking at another area of exploration. And that might be, so whenever I recommend to somebody starting, I suggest a bowl, because that's where you can really start to get something in your hands quickly. And some people just never progress beyond that. Anyway.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it's Ron Sheehan here. I'd
Hi,
like to comment to Mike. I bought a Powermatic lathe back about 2005 and didn't know much at all about turning. And I think I have two or maybe three of Mike's books, and a couple of the techniques and so forth. And I went through a lot of the practices he talked about, making beads and coves on the spindles and so forth. Uh, I learned a lot of technique from the books, and I thought they were well done. I was a little surprised at that review I read the other day about your latest book, but I guess the reviewer has a point if you're thinking about making artistic items and vessels and so forth. But Mike's point of doing different things and useful things, that kind of turns some people off, I guess, is what it amounts to. But I know I learned a lot from Mike's books.
Anybody else before we go on with more pieces from the new book?
I have a question, but it's particularly about this piece, and I was wondering, Mike, when you turn the arches, is the shaped interior, was that cut with the same shaper you used on the rectangular portion, or did you turn that contour to match the shaper cut?
Well, you can do it either way. You can run your straight sections first and match the arches to them, or you can turn the arches and match the straight sections. It's probably better to do the former, I find. And what you'll see in the description in the book is that I actually use an internal template to check that I've got the cross section of the arches correct. So I have a slot in the circle and I use a template that way. If you attempt to have an outside template, it's very much harder to get a perfect match.
Well, I would be inclined in a project like this to be buying the straight moldings, whatever I could easily get, because I don't have a shaper and I hate routers, and then turning to fit to match that if I was going to make this piece, which I find an attractive piece.
I'd like to make a comment about the turnings. I do a lot of boxes of different types of shapes and stuff like that, give them away, and I'm just really not into bowls. I think there's a variety of things that you can turn that are useful and interesting and still decorative. I find that some of the things, many of the things I see in the AA magazine turn out to be more artistic, and quite frankly, they're decorative and useful. However, I learn an awful lot of the techniques and ideas that they use when they do make them. So I find the magazine extremely interesting from that perspective. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next piece and then we can continue the chat. What do you got there, Ernie?
Mike?
Yes, these are called molinillos. Very hard word to say, and they're really chocolate frothers. And they were invented by the Spanish when they started to drink chocolate, because when chocolate was first discovered by Europeans, it was drunk. Chocolate bars weren't invented until late in the 19th century. And I give quite a long history of chocolate and a description of how it's made in the book, because I found it fascinating. And it's a relatively simple turning, and so there's not really a lot you can say about it. The turning at the back, the one with the parallel grooves, that's the Molinillo which came with the chocolate pot shown on the left, and then the two front ones are ones that I made, and the one at the front is very much the sort of antique design as invented by the Spanish.
I had seen those in tourist shops in Mexico. Yep, the very same.
And those are the two I made are in ash.
Now, Mike, are those one piece or is that a head and a handle separately doweled together?
They're two pieces. You could turn them as one, but I did them as two because you need to have that stiffness when you're carving. So I did them in two.
Questions, comments? Okay, what is this? What is that next one? Go for it, Ernie.
Yeah. Mike?
Right, these are things called Negus strainers. And Colonel Negus was a courtier and army general, and he was very concerned with the drunkenness in officers' messes. This is in the 18th century. And so he decided to invent a drink which was much less alcoholic. And Negus, and the N is a capital N, Negus, is a port wine diluted with lemon juice and spices. And port wine, we don't call it port wine now, it's a drink called Ruby Port. It's quite hard to get, but it's a really fruity young port, and it's really nice to drink. Anyway, he invented Negus, and I don't think it caught on at all in officers' messes. They continue to be places of drunkenness, but it found favour as a children's drink. And I think the point was that it sends the kids comatose, and that's a very good thing for parents.
Well, couldn't you use these as tea strainers as well?
You could. Yes, you could use them as any sort of strainer, really, but they're quite a testing thing to make. The one at the front, the darker one, is a copy of an original, and I felt it rather lacked capacity. There was if you poured the Negus through too quickly, it sort of overflowed. So I then made the one on the right, the paler one, which is rather deeper and less inclined to spill.
What is the diameter of these, Mike?
Round about 3 inches. So they're not very big.
I like that. Nice design.
But they make quite a good gift, because you can be sure that anyone you give one to won't already have one.
Next is something I happen to have an antique one of, so I'm going to fetch it. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead.
These are monaural stethoscopes. Monaural meaning one-eared. And in the early 19th century, 1816 to be precise, a French physician was getting more concerned that he had to put his ear to the bare female chest, and he wanted to sort of do it in a more, hear what was going on within the chest in a more delicate way. And he started by using a rolled up piece of paper, and then the design gradually developed. And this is a late 19th century design of monaural stethoscope. So the bottom end,
I have right here an antique one that has a hole through it that allows it to be stashed this way, so you can put it in your white coat pocket, and then it comes like this, and you get the monaural stethoscope. Can you see that? Yes, you can. My question, Mike, is how do you drill that little wee long hole?
You can buy long series drills. So these were drilled, I think it's 3/16 or 5/64, something like that. But if you buy a long series twist drill, you're fine.
How do you keep it straight?
And you drill the hole first and then chuck the stem by the hole. So it doesn't matter if when you're drilling you go offline a bit.
Cool.
But they're a very good gift to give your doctor, or if you've got a pregnant relative, you know, it's surprising how people really like to receive these useful type gifts.
Well, it's matter.
And having that functionality makes them rather more interesting, I think, than a vessel.
I've actually used mine my antique one to determine which bearing was bad in a motor.
Yeah, so there we go.
I might add too that if you're buying drills, a standard drill you buy in the United States is called a jobber drill, J-O-B-E-R. And if you want a really long one, it's called an aircraft drill. And if you want a shorter one, it's called a screw machine drill.
Comments on this piece? Any more comments on this?
Yeah, talking about long, thin drills, I thought of something, in Home Depot, you'll see drills that they use for buildings to drill up through the rafters or through the walls to run wires. I don't know how small they go, but they get really long. So you might find something there that would make something like this.
No, I think you've got to go to an engineering supplies for these. The carpenter's augers won't go down to this diameter.
Aircraft bits will do it, that's for sure. I have some of those actually.
Yeah, they're out. The really long ones are called bell drills
Bell
because
net.
they ran bell wires with them originally.
Okay, next piece.
Some pepper mills.
Yes, I was. The problem with a lot of pepper mills is that to get increased capacity, they make them taller. And I'm sure you've probably been into restaurants and they have pepper mills almost 1 meter long. So I wanted to make a short one which had got plenty of capacity, and also where you fill it, it belled out so that you didn't spill the peppercorns all over the place when you filled them. So this is a design done in 3 pieces, and it uses the crush grind, the Danish mechanism. And I think they look rather attractive, and they're a bit different to everyone else's design.
They're beautiful.
But again, you'll find in the book quite a long story about pepper, which is one of those interesting spices, and it goes into the exploration of the subcontinent, because pepper was mainly grown in southern India.
Well, that's the thing about project books. When it's just relentless, a death march from one tool and step to the next, it's quite dull and difficult to deal with. So I really appreciate Mike's approach to tell you, to pull from general history and knowledge to explain what these things are in social context. It's very interesting to me.
That was my love of the book too. The next one I'm itching to make.
What is that?
Well, that's a back scratcher, and it's a very simple spindle turning project, and it actually works. Not that I have to use it very often, but it's just one of those interesting projects which again shows the potential for turning to produce useful things. And also coming back to that business about history and background, if when you give one of these things to someone and you explain the background and history to it, it makes them appreciate it a lot more than, you know, here's a bowl.
And what's the length on this, Mike? This is Alan Miller.
These are about 2 feet.
So in the end there, the 4 rings, those are sanded off or cut off to make a sharp corner. Go ahead and say it again. You can make those quite sharp for people who like a rough scratch.
That's right. Yeah.
Next, or questions? 2 feet. Did you turn that with a steady or steady it with your hand?
With my hand.
Yeah.
Just coming back to your turning the balusters.
Yeah.
One way to avoid a steady is to put the left-hand end of the workpiece into a forge or chuck. and that stiffens it up. And I mean, balusters are sort of on the borderline of whether you need a steady or not. And if you put the one end into a forge or a chuck, you'll find that you won't need a steady.
I'm going to try that. I also find I like to use my hands as a steady. I like to get my hands all over the work while it's going around. It's just a sensual pleasure, and it's interesting. It surprises me how much you can detect from spinning work through your fingertips.
Yeah, the other part about that four-jaw chuck is that when you use it for a spindle, you don't have to use the tailstock pressure quite so high, so it doesn't create that tension in the piece that causes the vibration.
Okay.
Works really well.
Next piece, Ernie. By the way, we're at half the hour, but I'm finding this plenty interesting, so I'm going to stay with Mike. We normally don't let anybody ramble on for more than a half an hour on this program, but I don't see anybody yet yammering to go on to something else. So let's stay with Mike and see the rest of the book. Okay,
these are funnels, and these are based upon normal funnels. The one on the left the originals have a piece of gauze in the bulb at the bottom, so it's a filter and a funnel. And you'll see in the book there's another design of funnel which is made for filling jam jars. So you don't have to stick with the normal type design of funnel, which these are, but you can design and make funnels for filling special containers. So, if you've got a lot of screws to put in a lot of jam jars, make a suitable funnel so that you don't spill the screws all over the place when you fill the jam jars. Could I just come in on one earlier point, and that's teaching. The first turning book, and the book which sort of got me into turning, was Peter Child's book, The Craftsman Woodturner. And he reckons bowl turning is especially difficult. And he starts his book with bowl turning and then goes on to spindle turning. I did the 3-year trade course at Sydney Technical College, and there the first year is spent on spindle turning. And then you go on to bowl turning and hollow turning, and they're really so simple because you've learned how to apply the bevel in spindle turning, which is, I think most people would agree, much more difficult than bowl turning, but it's not hard. And the problem, as I see it, it's the same over here, is that people think they'll take up turning and they don't want to learn properly because it's a pastime to them. It's not a serious hobby in many cases. If you want to turn well, you need to do it in a disciplined way, and it'll take you around 30 to 40 hours of proper tuition and practice to achieve that basic competence. Now, if you're going to be turning for 10 or 20 years, what's 40 hours? But the fact is that people are generally loath to do it. And it's actually, I would think in America, quite hard to find people who can teach adequately so that 40 hours is enough. They'd rather go on and make a bowl and maybe use a carbide scraper. And so they're achieving finished objects very quickly. Whereas if you're going to learn in the way I think is best, you spend your first 40 hours making decorative firewood. So, it's a different approach. And I think that if you develop that basic overall competence, then you can turn useful things or you can turn art things. It doesn't matter. You've got those skills, but you've got to put in that serious learning and practice. And until people are prepared to do that, they're not really going to get anywhere.
Well, that's a kind of fairly contentious. So before we go on, let's see if there's comment or argumentation on that one. Anybody?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mike on that.
Is this Angelo?
Angelo. Hello, Mike Darlow.
Yes, hello.
And I agree with Mike on that. In fact, the first turning courses I took here in the States, we did nothing but turn beads and cove spindles for the first 2 or 3 days, and then went on to other types of turning, mainly bowls, and then end grain hollowing. So yeah, you develop a sensitivity and a skill with spindle turning that you don't get with just turning a one-off bowl on a weekend class. So I agree with you, Mike.
I also agree with Mike. I always start any week-long course I teach with spindle turning, and I always quip to the students on day 2 that until they've found a quiet cove, they aren't ready to move on. And it's a struggle, but they get it.
I would agree with both of your comments. However, I'm going to just add the caveat. I never took a turning course in my life, and the first time I turned was with my dad's lathe. I'd seen somebody do it, and I picked up a tool and just started. So if you're going to me, there's awful lot of people that are out there that are not going to, they just have never seen a lathe or something like that. So they want to see something that captures their attention. What I'm talking about is how you capture somebody to get them into the course to actually take that 30 or 40 hours that you're talking about and do a wood turning course in the first place. If you can get them into your course, yeah, great. But how do I get the amateurs and the young kids to just get fascinated with the turning question other than reading a book?
Well, I found the best thing to do to get them interested was to turn a top or an egg, which is spindle turning, and then hand them the tool and help them through it. They love it.
Sure.
Anybody else?
This is Kai, yeah. I just wanted to say that I agree as well with the bowl turning point. I started off with bowl turning as well, and I think it's easier than doing spindle work, especially if you want to do small, delicate objects with a lot of detail. Then you need much more technique and knowledge about the tools than you need with bowl turning. As a beginner in bowl turning, you get away with a lot of sanding, and you can produce a finished object in a certain amount of time, and it impresses people. If you can show a big bowl, it's kind of an impressive thing, and people like it. And also maybe it's a sales point on the market. People who want to turn bowls need big lathe and expensive tools, long tools, and stuff like that. So that's something that is encouraged. And I just went through a book of an exhibition here in Germany at a wood turning gathering, and about 80% of the work pieces that were shown there are either bowls or hollow forms. So I think the point is right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I used to equip at symposiums for a while and yes, you had a lathe that you could chuck a Falvet, a Volkswagen Beetle in. You just weren't a member of the club.
Well, I've had big lathes, but I currently have a standard 1442, which I just absolutely love, or I guess 7 diameter radius. Yeah. Anybody else? Let's go on to the next project and see what else that kicks up. There you go. Tops, my favorite for introducing kids. They love them.
These are the tops I do, so they're sort of educational in that I write the wood species on them, and they have a nail in the bottom, as you see, a little brass escutcheon pin, and you can turn around about a dozen of these an hour, I find, And they're very popular. And I give a lot away to friends' kids and things like that. And you can use, obviously, scrap wood up. And the more species you use, the better. And they're actually good for your skew chisel technique.
Yeah.
Would you turn those entirely with a skew, or would you use gouge and skew or parting tool? What would be your kit for one of these?
No, I have. I use two tools. I use a 10mm or a small spindle gouge, and then for the front, and then all the back. That's the face, the main face, and the little stub are all done with the skew.
Okay.
So I use the small skew as a parting tool during this as well.
Next piece. Ernie? Yeah.
Okay, this is called a reel stand. And this is in mahogany, and the rods are 1/8 diameter brass. The difficult thing I found was designing the central column between the two plates. The proportions of diameter height are such that it's actually very hard to get a column which works, and this was the best I could do. Very useful thing. My wife has one, and I've sold quite a few, and you can take the thread directly off the reel stand into the sewing machine if you want to. And also, of course, they're a very decorative item, and women tend to have lots of different colored threads, and they look very good on the stand.
What's the cup on top for?
A pin cushion goes in there. Nice. And the owner will make the pin cushion. I don't supply those. It's quite interesting, the history of thread, and there's several pages on it at the start of the chapter on these. What happened was that most of the sewing thread was linen or silk, and the Napoleonic Wars in the early years of the 19th century meant that silk thread couldn't be imported from France. Napoleon forbade it. And two brothers in Paisley, which is a town near Glasgow in Scotland, sought how to get round this, and they invented a method of manufacturing cotton thread.
We're going to leave that for the book. Let's go on with the other different pieces, because we're going to run out of time if we go too deep into it. But the book, I'm sure, is very lush in this way.
Okay, well, as you see, it's spindle turnings and cup chuck turnings and 2 faceplate turnings. So there's nothing technically very difficult in it, but it's just a nice thing to do.
Nice piece.
Susan and I own quite a few antiques. We'd call them spool racks, but they've been made since what, early 19th century, Mike?
Yes, well, the first cotton reels came in about 1820. So there aren't any reel stands prior to then, because thread was sold in skeins rather than on reels.
Is this the last project in the book?
This is the last photo.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought there were more.
No. So we've run through the main ones. So I'll stop sharing screen.
Okay, we're back to gallery. Anybody else want to address this or ask Mike questions?
Oh yeah, this is Ron again. Comment there, Mike, you mentioned about the history of thread and so on, and there was some of that in your earlier book. And I think the reviewer in the current magazine commented and kind of critical of that. But yeah, if you're actually want to get a book and pick it up and start making shavings, that book has got too much other information in it. but I found it very interesting to learn the history about some of these things. And, if you know it, you have it, put it in a book, people pick it up. I appreciated it.
It goes to show you that any publicity is good publicity. I agree with Ron. I found the very points that Steve Forrest didn't like in his review to be attractions for me that made me want to buy the book, not the other way around.
Yeah, me too.
I came in a little late. Is the book out for sale, and where can we get it?
It's on Amazon, published by Fox Chapel. It's on Amazon. And again, you can read my review at the bottom of the Amazon page. And if I haven't already, I'll send it to Mike to go out with the newsletter. And it has pictures pasted into it as well.
And I also was a bit late. What's the name of the book?
Useful Wood Turning Projects.
I'm going to spotlight you, Ernie, just a second.
And it's very lushly illustrated. Mike is a good photographer, and the illustrations are very nice and precise. You will have to buy a metric ruler, but that's not a bad thing.
I actually bought a cheapo general caliper at the hardware store the other day, and it turns out to be both metric and inch at the same time, which is very helpful.
Very nice ruler from Lee Valley Tools. They're $8, metric one side, English the other, and they're 1 meter long, or 39.37 inches. You can convert by holding your fingernail wherever you want and turning it over.
I'm going to take the spotlight here for a second. Replace spotlight. This is Mike Darlow's earlier book on wood turning design, which is a book I rely on. It's one of the very few books that actually discusses ratio and proportion in terms of design. And there's some extraordinarily illustrative sections in here of design variations on the same theme. There's one section, and I use this all the time. I find it an essential reference to understanding design. Here's a section here on moldings and the basic shapes you have to work with. It's brought together in a way that I have not found in other books, and I really want to thank Mike in particular for this book. It's been a tremendous asset to me, and I know to anybody else who has it feels the same way.
The interesting thing is that it is actually the least popular of my books.
That I would have expected that. As an ex-publishing executive, I would have predicted that, as a matter of fact. But that's the nature of the marketplace in the world.
And castor oil is sometimes good for you.
Go back to the discussion about spindle turning. I found it really interesting, and I was fortunate very early to get a mentor that took me tool by tool through spindle turning and really learned that. But in our club, I recently did a survey of interest in different areas of wood turning, and spindle turning came out on the bottom of the list. And I don't quite understand why that is today, that people just aren't interested, don't want it, or maybe it is that people just move too fast to the other types, but without learning how to use a spindle gouge and a skew and some of the other basic tools, you become limited forever. And it sounds like you others have all the similar experience.
I found learning to make boxes to be where the twain would meet. You have spindle turning and faceplate turning techniques when you turn a box, even though it's generally in spindle orientation. But I've turned a lot of faceplate blocks too in cross grain orientation, and I found that getting good at boxes, which to me means making dozens, was a very good way to learn a lot and have a lot of great gifts. Anybody?
I have a favorite Mike Darlow book too, and it's this one here.
I'm going to spotlight you, Angelo. Just a sec.
Okay.
Thanks.
I don't know why it's backwards, but.
No, we're right way around. It's backwards to you, but right way around to us.
Okay. As you know, John, I've got boxes of turning blanks already cut for several of the chess sets in this book. And I've turned two of the French style chess sets.
Wow.
But I first saw these in a Michael Mode article. I believe it was in the American Woodturner. But Mike did an in-depth study of that same chess set in his book.
So what's the time investment for a chess set?
Forever.
Mike, you want to talk to that?
Well, the set that Angela showed is obviously a fairly testing one. And I've designed several chess sets which are actually very simple to turn. The Lopez design is just cones with piece signatures on the top, like little spheres or battlements or things, and that can be made in, well, a relatively short time, say 10 minutes a piece. What are there? There's 32 pieces.
5 hours.
So it's about, you should be able to make one in a day.
Well, my dad was a very serious chess player, and he wouldn't play with anything but a standard Staunton set because he said all of the artistic sets caused confusion in sorting out the pieces, which caused you to play badly.
Well, that's correct. And in tournament play, tournaments are all, they use the Staunton pattern so that players can't say that they lost because they were confused by the pieces. So in the sets I've designed, I've tried to be to make the pieces very clear, and I sort of invented the concept of set signatures, side signatures, and piece signatures, so that you make these absolutely clear, and then a stranger can come in and play with the set without needing instruction.
Yeah, here's that Lopez.
Yeah, that's the Lopez design, which is a very simple one to make. It's actually, says he modestly, quite a clever design in that the way I've kicked over the knight's body. It's not a vertical cone, it's tilted over. Can you hold that up, Angelo? Just to show them the knight.
Yeah, everybody should be seeing both of these guys large. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
So the knight's third from the right, and you can see how it resembles a charger's neck and head.
I have a lot of trouble distinguishing the bishop. I don't know what the hell it is.
Well, that's a mitre.
Can't see it in the picture. Is Mike Peace on today? No. Mike Peace was going to do us a show on making chess sets because he's very into that right now too. And it's certainly caught my interest, especially now that I see Angelo's doing it.
Talking about making chess sets, I don't know if it counts or not, but what I did, I bought a set of chess pieces in cast brass. They had a base and they had a top, and basically all I had to do was turn a center spindle in kind of an hourglass shape of the correct height, and then screw them together, and you had all of the proper shapes and so forth. But I made a set and gave it to my son.
Where did you find those, Ron?
I'm not sure. That's many years ago, probably on Rockler or someplace like that. It was a nice set, but as I said, it was just a little spindle turning of little spools, like to run a rod through to screw the top and the bottom together.
My son bought a set of those brass pieces and used them as drawer pulls on a tool cabinet.
Yeah, that would work.
I think one of the things that people have sort of shied around here is what you do with your turning pieces after you've done it. I mean, if you have one chess set in the house and you have one set and you're done, if you want to give away chess sets, that's fine too. The real question is, who are you making this stuff for? Are you making it for somebody else, or are you making it for your own satisfaction? And once you've made it, your house starts to fill up with wood turnings. So I've yet to walk into a wood turner's house who hasn't got 50,000 wood turnings all over the place. And you almost have to give it away because of necessity as opposed to anything else. But
well, I think
giving it away versus making, sorry.
the point with functional turnings is you have a lot more scope, whereas how many bowls does a house need? And I suspect about 4. And so after you've turned 4 bowls, you've then got a problem of what to do with them. But if you're turning useful objects, you can go on to turning a different useful object. So you've got a lot more potential to keep things, and also you'll find that people really appreciate some of these useful things.
Well, to your point, Mike, to your point, you only need 4 bowls, but you only need 1 pepper grinder. You only need, or maybe you need 2 pepper grinders. You need 1 salt shaker. You need 1 honey scoop. You need 1 spurtle. You know, so every object you're talking about, a household really only needs 1 or 2 of them. So you have to expand your projects as opposed to expand your technique on bowls, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I find I can't just make 1 because I have to make 3 or 4 before I understand what the hell I'm doing.
Exactly.
And any
both
bowl,
of those.
To get really good at something, you have to make a series, and that's often maybe 10 or 20 till you can really do it, till you get the design right and the feeling for the tools and whatever. So I tend to make lots of boats, lots of spinning tops, and lots of whatever. So your baluster project, that's a good thing because you can do 50 of a kind and still have a use for it.
Absolutely right. I find it enormously instructive. And now that I'm cruising toward 80 balusters, and I don't turn for more than a couple of hours a day because I'm an old guy and I got other things to do like nap, I find I learn something every time I do it. And I don't know quite where the comment came that wood turning isn't supposed to be fun. I enjoy it a lot. And I don't care if I have another 100 balusters to turn, I'll enjoy them all.
It's my therapy.
It is.
Well, I think the point is that, fun is, what does it mean? And there's sort of fun where you're laughing all the time, and there's fun which is more related to satisfaction. Yeah. And that's what a couple of things I don't like about that review. And one, he makes that, he pulls that quotation out about fun, and he misses the fact that I say it's not fun, ha-ha fun. It's much more about satisfaction and development and innovation rather than fun.
Well, it's an addition of pleasure while you're doing it. It's very satisfying to get the result, that's for sure. But the act of turning itself is pleasurable. It's interesting and pleasurable, and it commands all of your attention. So the chattering monkey inside the head has to shut down while you do it.
Yeah.
Boy, that stopped you all.
Well, no,
there was an instructor that I had who liked to do work in series because he felt that no matter how the one that he was working on turned out, he could always do better on the next one.
Yes.
The other thing that I can say is that both of the French chess sets that I've made, I've sold. So I don't have one of my own. So I need to make one of my own. And one of the fellow that I learned how to make these ball vases from said to me, he said, "Are you making one of these for each of your children every time you make a new style?" And I said, "No." He said, "You really should be making one for each child." And so that's the quest I'm on now, is to put my legacy aside for the kids.
Very good. Very, absolutely right.
Yeah, I have the same thing, Angelo. I have 4 kids, and so if I make one for one of them, I got to make 3 more.
I've got between children and grandchildren and daughters-in-law, there's more than a dozen of them, and that's what I do at Christmas time too, is make lots, but not the same thing. But I make something for everybody most years.
Yeah.
I think production runs are crucial to really learning to turn well, and your speed goes up, your use of tools gets better, you learn quickly to go sharpen a tool rather than go on. And I just think it's sort of the gateway to becoming a really skilled turner from an adequate turner.
Yeah, there's something to that, I'm sure.
And on that note, everybody, I'm going to declare the coffee hour formally over as it's 11 o'clock. And I will look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday night at the regular monthly Lancaster Area Woodturners Club meeting. And I will leave the screen open so you can yickety yak among yourselves for as long as you like.
Thank you.
I understand what you say about turning, production turning. My problem is that as Kai alluded to, when I start turning something for larger numbers, and I get good at it, very next thing that happens is I get bored with it. So I want to move on to new projects all the time. So looking for new projects, that's one of the things with this book I'm interested in. It's not so much whether it's spindle turning or whether it's bowl turning or gouges or whatever, it's whether the project intrigues me or not. So thank you very much.
Can somebody out there tell me the name of the book that John brought up, Mr. Darlow's book that I guess was one of his first books that he was was talking about? Do you remember the title of that?
John, you're on mute.
Yeah, wood turning design.
Thank you very much.
And I did not mean to end the hour without thanking Mike and Ernie very much. Mike, I really appreciate your willingness to get up at 2 a.m. to be with us. And I hope,
I've enjoyed it, and it's been good to catch up with you. And I had some contact with Angelo, 15 years ago. So it's good to see he's still at it.
Well, last time I saw Mike, we were on opposite sides of a very complicated and, in my opinion, stupid legal dispute about royalties and payments. Since you're still with Fox Chapel, I guess that must be resolved. Congratulations.
Yes, just one thing, not on that, but on Fox Chapel. When I produced Wood Turn Chessmen, because the way I did all the books except the last one was I actually was the lead publisher, and then I sold copies to Fox Chapel in America and to a different company in UK. And when I produced Turn Chessmen, Fox said absolutely no chance it'll be a goer. It's going to be a very poor seller, and I think it's pretty well been my most successful book.
It shows you what the hell we know.
Yeah.
It's always a punt.
Thanks, guys.
As you might say, it's always a bit of a punt, isn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, I suppose I write books for me.
That's right.
To rather than say, here's an audience which I'll target, so I'll sell lots of copies. I write books which interest me and to increase my knowledge and find out the things which I know I don't know. And if other people buy them, that's great. And if they don't, I've still enjoyed doing it.
I find
I've
always written articles. I've always preferred to write articles about subjects that I was interested in. I get to learn about all the subject, and I don't write until I feel I understand it. And it's that's the way to go for me. If I want to learn something, I'm going to write about it.
In technique books, though, the writer has to really understand the art he's writing about, or it won't be a good book. It's key that you have to have a further understanding of the craft than the normal artisan does. My cat's walking in front of the screen. I've said all.
To your point, Ernie, I've spent my career as an engineer doing a lot of instruction on the plant and anything, and my comment has always been that until you sit down and write about it, you're never sure what you know about it, because once you have to put it down in words and then read that sentence back to yourself, you don't realize how stupid it sounds, or how little you know, or what you have to read back, or what you have to go and learn again. as you're writing, but really writing it down forces you to learn it in a much greater depth, in my mind, than you would otherwise.
I always felt that there's not a better way to learn than try to teach something, because once you start thinking about teaching it, you darn well better learn a little bit about the subject first.
Yeah, but you've got to understand the craft well enough to be able to even put it into words, which is often a level. There's an awful lot of craftsmen from the days of craftsmen that did X instead of Y enough times that they figured that out, that it works, but they don't really understand the underlying physics behind it.
Yeah.
And to me, Ernie, that's what makes the difference between a good instruction book and one of the run-of-the-mill ones.
Yeah.
Is because the people who understand it can write well about it. The people who don't understand it just seem to just write schlock. You know.
That's something I always find intriguing with Ernie. Anytime he starts talking about a subject, he always seems to really understand the basics.
Thank you.
Well, I think the key is to not talk about things you don't understand too. I know that Ernie is reluctant to get lured into deep discussions of things he doesn't already know about, except to ask questions.
Good point.
John, if people didn't talk about stuff they didn't understand, the world would be silent. We wouldn't have any politicians.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, interestingly, I wrote my first book, The Practice of Wood Turning, which some of you will have the one in black and white. When I started on this 3-year turning course, it quickly became obvious that what I was being taught on the course differed quite often from what was put forward in the couple of books which were available at that time. So I started to write that book as soon as I started to learn.
And I feel too from reading it. Yep, feels exactly. That's what I always thought about it too. He doesn't quite know enough.
Well, I knew more than most people by the time I wrote that book in 10 days in 1981, so I'd been turning then for about 6 years. And actually, I occasionally meet people and they say, I learned from that book. So that's good. But
good book. It is a good book. I've had it for a long time and I've learned from it.
So it was really to resolve the differences in technique which were being promoted at that time. And this is what really concerns me. I've got about 70 wood turning books, and the difference in technique for doing the same thing is I'm concerned about it, in that I think there's a lot of suboptimal information being given to wood turners at the present time. And I think there needs to be a lot more criticism. For instance, many years ago, this was when American Wood Turner was in black and white, there was an article about some new piece of equipment. And I wrote quite a long article showing that it was actually a waste of time. And the editor referred it to the then committee, who said don't publish it, and the grounds they put forward was that it would affect the reputation of the person who'd written the original article. And I was appalled by that someone who'd basically written a very poor and ill-considered article was considered ahead of all the members who might go out and waste their money.
I think the AAW still operates on that same premise.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's right. I mean, to give bad wood turning information isn't a criminal offence. I've given a fair bit of it myself. But unless there's active criticism, then substandard information proliferates. And I'm very much against the way that American wood turner has changed. If you look at the early issues, there was lots of debate and disagreement in them. And now there are no readers' letters, no disagreement, and it's boring. And they've set up this website for, what's it called, for debating. But essentially that's just become a place where people get answers to what polish to use. So I think that the American wood turner has been emasculated, and I just skip it through in about 2 or 3 minutes when I receive mine. There's nothing in there I find particularly interesting. Okay, some of the techniques are marginally interesting, but there's no exploration of issues.
What issues would you explore when you say exploration of issues?
Well, I mean, we've been exploring some today, haven't we? Whether, you know, it's better to use, to start with spindle turning or bowl turning, and equipment. We really should have, I think, objective reviews of equipment. For instance, most people buy the wrong lathe. Most people are going to turn a certain number of bowls, which is absolutely fine, but they buy lathes which are patently unsuited to bowl turning. If you want to turn bowls comfortably and well, you've got to turn them outboard or the equivalent. So what do people buy? They buy bowls, they buy lathes with a fixed headstock on which they can only turn inboard.
Would you like to join us next week, or is 2 a.m. too impossible for you? Because that's the topic next week, is which lathe to buy. We have several people involved in that.
Well, yes, that'll be fine. I mean, I have sort of correspondence with lathe manufacturers from time to time. And what surprises me is how totally resistant they are to change.
Well, this is the reason for the discussion on lathes for me wasn't which model is the best from the number of view of features. It's like, that's like asking how many coffee holders are in a car for me. My question is what people experiences in a lathe, and you know, the maintenance of lathes, the things that people are running to that they'd actually like to hear, as opposed to, because that's the long term. Once I've spent the money, that's the easy part. But the long term is living with that decision afterwards, and what you, for example, what you like and what you don't like about your lathe. You know, I for example, have owned Novas, and now I have a Powermatic. They've got their relative differences, and it's just an interesting discussion. So that's what we hope to talk about next week. One of the gentlemen that is with us, Jeff Mullen, I think, is one of the ones that was asking me. Is it you on there, Jeff?
Yes, I'm here.
Well, we don't want to pose the question. I know that Ernie was involved in the design of the Powermatic, and I also know that Barry's been shopping for a new lathe lately as well. So there's a bunch of bubble and seeds on that around in this group.
I also have reviewed, I don't know how many tools in my day, and outside of wood turning too, because I'm a cabinet maker with a wood turning problem. But I think that any review ought to have the reviewer come back after 6 months or a year of using it, because I've had tools I totally changed my mind on that I thought were bad but were really good, or I thought were unbelievable and really were terrible after a year or so. So using a product against just reviewing a product are two different things.
Absolutely. And that is what I want to really, that's what I want to be the basis of our discussion next week, is what you really find from using your product as opposed to just reviewing it.
Well, I'll be delighted to sing the praises of the robust Scout that I bought several years ago. It's been a terrific lathe and extraordinarily versatile for me, but it's a basic standard lathe that allows outboard turning.
I picked that lathe for the showpiece lathe in the 3rd edition of the lathe book because one is, I think, now there's 2 American lathes yet, but it was an American lathe, and secondly, it eminently suited the small workshop and had the things that Mike just discussed, that people buy a lathe for one reason, that's their interest, and they're harnessed with its shortcomings for the rest of its life.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeff, have we got your attention yet?
Absolutely. I'm fascinated with all the expertise, and the reason you don't hear from me is because I have zero knowledge next to everybody else here.
Well, you know, Jeff, some of the best discussions come from people putting problems out there, not answers.
Okay.
I'd also rather teach a person that has never taught before than one that learned to turn in shop class.
Just on this lathe thing, at the peak of my business, we had 21 lathes. So I've quite experienced with lathes, and I've still got a German Geiger, and I've got Australian lathes, I've had British lathes, and I had a big Oliver. So I'm pretty experienced with lathes. And just one other thing, apart from the importance of outboard, is that if you want to turn a bowl, the best way to turn it is, if you're right-handed, is to turn the outside with the bowl running anti-clockwise, and to turn the inside with the bowl running clockwise. This means that you want to be able to run the lathe in both directions safely. So it's not only that you need an outboard facility, you need a facility to lock the chuck onto the spindle so that you can run it both ways.
Well,
frankly, if a lathe doesn't have those 2 features, I don't think you should be buying it.
Well, most of our scroll chucks have a grub screw that allows you to lock it onto the spindle for exactly that reason. I know the one-ways do, and so do the Novas.
Yeah. And so do yeah, anyway.
You can lock a one-way as well.
Yes.
Mike, what Geiger model do you have?
Well, I've got 2 Vic Marks. I've got one which is about 16 feet between centers, which I haven't turned any veranda posts for some years now. But I'm not totally happy with any of the lathes I've got. There are things I would want to change. Maybe we should leave that till next week. And what I'll do, I'll send Ernie some pictures that he can put up for you, and we can have a bit of discussion on them, because there's all sorts of features which, even in the most expensive lathes, they get wrong, because they're in the main designed by engineers, and whoever they go, which wood turners they go to for advice, I don't know, but in most cases the advice isn't terribly good.
Well, I think you might find quite a bit of argumentation on all these points with this group this week, so I will look forward to that conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say cheerio.
And I am too. Yeah.
It's getting, no doubt it's getting late. So thank you everybody for your discussions today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you everybody too.
I'll include all of this in the recording.